How far would you go to make a quick dollar? Most of us have thought about this at one time or another, and because we're normal, we go for jobs like babysitting or dog walking. But how many of us have thought about more unconventional methods to make money? Like, let's say, kidnapping? The case we're looking at today is one of the most famous mass kidnappings in history that was started out of greed and desperation. What's amazing about this case is that not only did everyone involved survive, but they got justice for what happened to them. On February 21st, 1921, Frank J. Edward Ray was born in La Grande, California. Known as Ed, he was one of 8 children born to Frank Sr. and Mary Ray. At a young age, Ed's family moved to the city of Chowchilla in Madera County, California. Growing up, Ed loved living in Chowchilla, and by the time he was ready to graduate from high school, he realized he wasn't ready to leave his hometown. Along with his wife, Odessa, Ed bought a farm and spent 10 years successfully growing corn and raising cattle. He and Odessa had 2 sons, Glenn and Danny, and life seemed totally perfect. In the 1950s, Ed decided to become a bus driver for the local school district. He was super dedicated to his job and highly respected by school staff and the students that would take his bus every day. His life was normal and trouble-free until July 15th, 1976. Ed was spending the summer transporting kids to and from summer school. It seemed like any other day. He arrived at the school to collect the kids, and they started off on their usual route. There were 26 kids on the bus, 19 girls and 7 boys, their ages ranging between 5 and 14 years old. But on the way, Ed encountered something odd. A van pulled over by the side of the road. Ed stopped because, like the Good Samaritan he is, he thought maybe they'd broken down and needed some help. He never could have anticipated what happened next. From the van emerged 3 men, covering their faces with pantyhose and one carrying a sawed-off shotgun. Immediately, he knew something was wrong. The men told Ed to step away from the wheel, and he complied, trying to keep the kids calm as the strangers took over the bus, one driving, one pointing the shotgun, and one driving the white van behind them. They drove for a while until one of the men drove the bus off the road and parked it in a dry riverbed surrounded by bamboo, tall enough to conceal the bus. Nearby was a second van that was driven as close to the bus as they could get it. They instructed the kids to start jumping into the backs of the vans, making sure nobody stepped on the ground so there wouldn't be any footprints left behind. They drove for 12 horrible hours. They had no food, water, or stops for bathroom breaks, so you can imagine how chaotic the back of the vans became. The younger kids especially were totally terrified, even though some of the older ones tried to comfort them by singing songs and telling them everything was going to be okay. But nothing could distract them from the misery of being crammed into the back of a van in the July heat. As this was happening, the families of the kids started to panic. It was scary for one kid to go missing, but a bus full of 26 and their driver, that was a nightmare. The parents helped out the police by tracing the route the bus usually took every day, and by that evening, they'd found something: the abandoned bus. Within hours, 30 FBI agents had arrived on the scene, and an intense investigation was underway to figure out what happened to their kids and Ed. The vans holding Ed and the kids finally came to a stop. They started taking people out of the vans one by one, starting with Ed. They would just grab the first kid that was inside the door. They opened the door and they grabbed somebody else, take one of us out, and close the door. At that point, after such a long drive, nobody even knew if they were in California anymore. One by one, the kids were asked their names and ages before being taken to their next location. The first thing they saw was a wooden ladder which took them down into a space they referred to as the hole. The hole was in fact an old truck trailer that had been put in a huge dugout spot 12 feet underground. Inside there were mattresses, food, water, makeshift toilets. It looked like they were going to be there for a while. Jennifer Brown Hyde, one of the survivors, commented that she could also hear fans, which turned out to be the makeshift ventilation system. If there needed to be a ventilation system, there was only one reason why. Once everyone was in the trailer, the kids removed the ladder and said, "We'll be back for you," before they closed the lid, leaving them in total darkness. And then they heard a thump, then another, something landing on top of the trailer. They couldn't see it, but their captors were shoveling dirt onto the trailer. They were burying them alive. As some of them started to realize what was happening, panic started to rise in the trailer. They were trapping them underground. How long did they expect to leave them there? How long before they ran out of food and water? Once again, Ed tried his absolute best to keep everybody calm because he he knew that there was no way they were going to make it out in one piece if hysteria broke out amongst the group. Ed and Michael Marshall, the oldest kid in the group, started pushing at the lid to see if there was any chance of opening it, but it was no good. They were stuck 12 feet underground. So Ed started handing out instructions. Everybody was told to eat something, drink water, use the bathroom, and get some rest. This would give them time to calm down, build their strength back up, and for Ed to make a plan of escape. Another 12 hours later, things started going downhill fast. All the food was gone, and worst of all, the ventilation system stopped working, and the hole started to fill up with hot air from outside. Ed knew their time was running out, and became especially concerned when he realized the roof was starting to cave in. There was this one boy, and he kept kicking blocks out from underneath the 4x4 pillars, and so the roof of the van was starting to cave in. The seams were breaking, dust was flowing through, the sides of the van were bowing in. Now, grown up, some of the survivors have given in-depth accounts of what happened and how they were feeling that day. Many of them said that by this point in the experience, they were trying to accept the fact that they wouldn't be leaving the hole alive. But Ed and Michael weren't ready to die there, so they started working to get everybody out. They started piling up the mattresses inside the trailer and managed to make them reach the roof. From there, they took turns pushing at the hatch and trying to at least shift the dirt on top of them. They finally started to feel hope when Michael managed to move the cover. It was a gap smaller than half a foot, but it was progress. Ed pushed Michael through the hole, and he was surprised by what he saw. Rather than burying them in just dirt, the men had put 2 truck batteries weighing about 100 pounds each on the lid of the trailer, along with some dirt, and then had covered the scene with a wooden box. Michael pushed and shoved at the box until he managed to break through, but he didn't stop there. There was even more debris on top of the box, and he kept digging, despite being exhausted from the heat, dehydrated, and starving. He'd done it. He'd managed to dig through. They were on the road to freedom. It was 8 p.m. on July 16th when the group finally managed to escape. They'd been inside the trailer for 16 hours and now had to figure out where they were and how they were going to get home. Over 100 miles away from Chowchilla, they'd been trapped in a quarry near Shadow Cliffs Regional Recreation Area in Livermore, California. Ed led the group towards the quarry, where he found a security guard. He told them where they were from, and they were lost, and the guard called the police. They were transported to the nearest place that could accommodate everybody, Santa Rita Rehabilitation Center, a nearby jail. Once there, they were given apples and soda and examined by doctors, as well as interviewed by police, who were still trying to figure out what the heck had happened. 36 hours after the whole ordeal began, they were put on another bus and sent back to Chowchilla, where their families were waiting to reunite with them. So you're probably wondering, what happened to the guys that did this? The 3 men were Frederick Newhall Woods, James Schoenfeld, and his brother Richard. The Fredericks family owned the quarry, and the Schoenfeld brothers came from another wealthy family. However, due to their carelessness with money, all 3 of the men found themselves in deep debt that they couldn't pay off. Their plan, which had been carefully constructed through months of preparation, was to hijack the bus with everyone inside and demand a $5 million ransom for their return. On the night of the 16th, the men woke up from resting from their mission, and the first thing they saw were news reports that the group had managed to escape. Immediately, they fled, and it took 2 weeks to track them down. Police had it on good authority that these guys were guilty. Security guards at the quarry had seen them digging the hole months before, and once the police got a warrant to search the property, they found the shotgun and a ransom note among their things. After a 2-week manhunt, all 3 men were captured and arrested. At trial, they were all sentenced to a life sentence with the possibility of parole. Richard was released in 2012, James in 2015, but Frederick remains in prison after being denied parole in 2019. The kids credit Ed for keeping them calm and helping them get out. He received a California School Employees Association citation for outstanding community service and continued to drive the bus until 1988 when he retired. He passed away in 2012. In the days before he passed, he was visited by most of the kids that he helped escape that day. This case was definitely a crazy one, but I'm so glad it had a happy ending and everyone got out okay. Thank you for watching today's video. What do you guys think of this case? I can't wait to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below.